Looking at these hands as they slowly knit stitch after stitch, you might see only a gentle 7-8-year-old Willa sitting on a New York porch. But do not be deceived by this appearance. Hidden beneath this wrinkled skin are the deep scars of a true story so brutal it cuts to the bone. I had to flee for my life from Harlan, a living hell, where my own father traded me like livestock for sick, twisted desires, forcing me to carry the seed of sin before I even turned 16. That pain is not just a memory. It is a cold, sharp blade that still slices through my heart every night. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your faith. There are stories that, no matter how painful, simply must be told. The cold of the Appalachian Mountains where I grew up could cut to the bone, but it warms my heart to be able to talk to you all as if you were right here with me. You know, today I spent the whole afternoon knitting for my great-grandchildren. It's something that calms my soul. Every stitch I make is like I'm weaving protection for them. I started knitting when my children were tiny, over 50 years ago. Back then it was out of necessity. There really wasn't such a thing as buying ready-made clothes, was there, folks? And look, today it has become my favorite hobby and even brings in a little extra money. Because the tourists here in New York love to take home a scarf or a beanie made by the granny from the mountains, as they call me. My little corner here is simple, but it's my refuge of peace. I have my flower pots full of red petunias in the window that everyone passing on the street stops to admire. Inside, photos of my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren take up the entire living room wall. They are my greatest treasure. Do you know that smell of homemade biscuits that's always lingering around here? The sound of the fire crackling in the fireplace, the view of the skyline out there. Every little corner of this house holds a piece of my history. Oh, and before I continue, I wanted to ask you a little favor, my angels. If you enjoy my company, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel Grandma's Memories so you don't miss this old lady's stories. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time of day you found this video. Early in the morning with your coffee, after lunch, or maybe at night. I always read all the comments. And it makes me so happy to know where you are from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this granny's stories. Tell me. Yes, let's create a chain of love. Today I wanted to share a story with you that I've carried in my chest for many years. A story about how my twin sons saved me even before they were born. It seems like something out of a movie, but it happened right here in the backwoods of Kentucky, in a time when women like me had to find strength we didn't even know we had inside. You know, my dears, life sometimes puts us in situations so difficult that we think we won't be able to get out. But when I look back, I see that it was precisely those darkest moments that brought me here, to this cozy porch in New York, where today I can tell my story with a heart at peace. I was born a long time ago on an isolated ranch in Harlan, right there in the Kentucky hills, but in a place so secluded it seemed like another world. It was a large property, with fields stretching as far as the eye could see, and a big colonial-style house that, seen from the outside, looked like a beautiful place to live. But the thick walls of that house hid secrets that for many years I thought would go to the grave with me. It was in those fields of the hollow, among the tall pines that seemed to touch the sky, where the icy wind cuts to the bone even in summer, that I spent my childhood. Harlan was a place of hard beauty, you know, the kind of beauty that hides its secrets in the morning mists, that only reveals itself to those who have eyes to see. Today I look back with a lighter heart, thanks to my twin sons, who even before being born, showed me a path to liberation that I would never have imagined possible. But that is a story I need to tell calmly from the beginning, because only those who have lived it know how hard it is to find strength when it seems everything is against you. In my childhood, back in the early 60s, our ranch in Harlan was known as Pine Hollow because of the hundreds of pines surrounding our property. It was an immense area that my father, Frank Jenkins, had inherited from my grandfather. A tall man, with an imposing bearing, a beard always well-groomed, and blue eyes so clear they looked like two pieces of frozen sky. He was respected and feared by everyone in the region. The son of wealthy landowners, he carried in his blood that ancient pride of the southern gentry. My mother, Ruby Jenkins, was the opposite, tiny, with hair black as a crow's wing, always with her head down. She had fairy hands for the kitchen, but she almost never smiled. Today I understand why, but back then I believed that's just how women were: quiet, obedient, with eyes always moist. We also had Aunt Betty, my mother's sister, who lived with us since she became a widow. It was she who combed my hair and told stories before sleep, always ending with a "May the good Lord protect you," whispered in my ear. We were 4 siblings. I was the oldest. Then came Ethan, barely 2 years younger than me. He was a quiet boy, observant, with eyes that seemed to see too much for his age. After him came Caleb, 4 years younger, always smiling and gentle. And finally, Grace, the baby of the family, born just before everything started to get worse. Our house was big, made of solid wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around the entire building. From afar, it looked like one of those plantation houses from the movies, you know? Beautiful, imposing, with cattle grazing in the green fields around. It had 2 floors. On the first, the huge kitchen with a wood-burning stove, the dining room with a long table that seemed to have no end, the living room where my father received visitors, and a room he called the study, where he kept his hunting guns, books, and a carved desk. Upstairs were the bedrooms, the big one for my parents, one for the girls, me and Grace, one for the boys, and another where Aunt Betty slept. In the back of the house, there was an orchard with apple trees that in autumn filled with bright red fruit. I loved climbing the trees to pick the prettiest apples. We also had a chicken coop where I went every day to collect the eggs, placing them carefully in the little basket my mother had woven from straw. In front of the house, my mother cultivated a garden of azaleas that in spring transformed everything into a sea of colors. Our routine began very early. The cold of the Kentucky hills made us wake up with numb hands and breath coming out like smoke from our mouths. Before the sun came up, we were all up. My mother and Aunt Betty lit the stove, prepared coffee for my father and breakfast. There was always grits and gravy, fresh cheese made right there, and warm biscuits. I helped with the household chores and took care of Grace. Caleb and Ethan went with my father to the fields to learn the work with the cattle. Our ranch raised mainly beef cattle, but also had some American quarter horses that my father said were purebred and that he showed off with pride when he received important visitors. The school was 3 miles from our ranch, and we went on foot, my brothers and I, along the dirt road, passing through open fields and pine forests. In winter, when the frost covered everything, it seemed we were walking in a crystal world. And on the way back, we always stopped at Stony Creek, a stream with waters so cold they hurt your teeth, to drink and rest a little. At school, we were known as the children of Mr. Frank. That opened doors, but also isolated us. The other children were somewhat wary, never inviting us to their houses. The teacher, Mrs. Sarah, a thin lady with round glasses, treated me with special attention. "A smart girl like you should study in the big city," she would say. Little did she know that those words planted a little seed of hope in me that years later would be my salvation. On Sundays, we all went to service at the wooden church in town. My father insisted we sit in the front pew, clearly visible. He wore his well-pressed black suit, felt hat, and polished boots. My mother and I wore our best dresses, and the boys, trousers, and starched shirts. It was a ritual more of appearance than faith. Today I understand that. After the service, my father stopped to talk with friends, important men of the region, the store owner, the sheriff, the mayor, some neighboring landowners. They formed a circle, speaking softly, laughing at things we couldn't hear. Sometimes one or another would look at me in a way that, even as a child, made me feel a shiver down my spine. It was at 9 years old that I noticed something was wrong. It was a Saturday night, the first of the month. My father had ordered that we all be especially clean and dressed up. The dining room table was set with the good china, the crystal glasses we only used on special occasions, and candles lit in the silver candelabras that were an inheritance from my paternal grandmother. "Important people are coming today, Willa," my father said, adjusting the knot of his tie in front of the mirror. "And you're going to be a good girl, right?" He wasn't smiling when he said that. His blue eyes looked like 2 cold stones. That was the first night of what they called the club. 15 men arrived, all in cars or on horseback. They were the same ones who talked to my father after church, plus a few others I didn't know, all well-dressed. smelling of shaving lotion, smoking cigars. My mother served dinner and was then sent to her room, taking little Grace. Caleb and Ethan were forced to stay in a corner of the living room, quiet, and I was called to the center as if I were an attraction, a thing to be shown. It was the first night, but not the last. That would become a monthly routine that would last for years. A darkness settled over that beautiful plantation home, a darkness that Willa would carry for decades. Can you imagine the terror of a child forced into that spotlight? Don't go anywhere. The real story of her survival is only just beginning, a routine that would mark my soul with invisible and deep scars. I was just a child, not fully understanding what was happening. I only knew that those nights filled me with a fear that had no name. Sometimes I disconnected, as if my soul left my body and stayed floating up there on the ceiling, watching everything from afar. It was the only way I found to endure, and over in the corner, my younger brothers, especially Ethan, cried in silence, tears falling without making a noise down their pale faces. The next day, no one spoke about what had happened. My mother hugged me tighter. Aunt Betty made me chamomile tea with honey, and my father acted as if everything was normal. And so the days passed, and I grew up between the terror of the first Saturdays of the month and the apparently normal routine of the other days. But the little Willa, who liked to climb trees and pick apples, who dreamed of being a teacher someday, was becoming quieter, more closed off. I drifted away from myself, as if the real Willa were hidden in some safe place, far from that beautiful ranch, which behind lace curtains and shining windows hid a private hell. Years went by, and that girl with braids and scraped knees grew up. When I turned 13, my body began to change, and with those changes, the interest of those men in the club too. My father, noticing this, began to present me differently at the meetings. I was no longer just Frank's daughter. I was the young lady of the house. It was at that age that I truly understood the horror of what was happening. It wasn't just strange looks or whispered words. It was something much worse, something I couldn't even name. It was so terrible. I only knew that after those nights, I felt dirty in a way that not all the water in the world could clean. My mother, poor unhappy soul, realized everything, but didn't have the strength to stand up to my father. She cried in secret, prayed for me, sometimes hugged me with such force that it hurt, as if she wanted to protect me with her own body. But in reality, she was also a victim of that man, Frank. She was only Ruby by name, because her life was a constant purgatory. "One day it will end, daughter," she whispered to me when we were alone. "One day you will get out of here. But how? To where?" We were isolated from everything and everyone. My father controlled every aspect of our lives, the money, the visits, even the letters that arrived by mail. Aunt Betty tried in her own way to alleviate my suffering. She taught me practical things, sewing, cooking, canning things that, according to her, would be useful to me when I had my own house. It was her way of giving me some hope for the future. As the months went by, I noticed changes in my routine. My father no longer let me go to school. "Grown young lady doesn't need much schooling," he said. "You're going to end up getting married and taking care of a house anyway." The real reason was different. Of course, he didn't want me talking to anyone from outside, making friends, having anyone notice the bruises I sometimes had or my distant look. Ethan, who was now barely 14, was my only true comfort. He understood even without words. Sometimes, in the days following those terrible nights, he would come to my room at dawn before everyone woke up and sit on the edge of my bed. He said nothing, just held my hand. And I knew he suffered as much as I did, in a different way, but equally deep. "I'm going to get you out of here one day, Willa," he promised me once with a seriousness that didn't match his age. "I swear on Grandma's soul." And I smiled, more to comfort him than because I really believed it. How could a skinny boy save me from that hell? On one of the club nights, when I was almost 15, there was a change in the ritual. One of the men, Dr. Walter, the doctor from the neighboring town, brought a large book with a black cover. They placed it on the living room table, along with an expensive fountain pen, one of those old ones, and then, one by one, all the men present signed that book, including my father. "It's the Book of the Brotherhood," I heard one of them explain in a low voice. "Here our society is registered, our meetings, our privileges." After that, The meetings became even more organized, more ritualized. My father became a sort of guardian of that book. He kept it under lock and key in his study, in a secret drawer of the desk, the key to which he always carried with him on a cord hidden under his shirt. Dr. Walter watched everything with a strange manner, without participating directly in what happened there, but always observing, writing things down in a little notebook he carried in his jacket pocket. Sometimes he asked to examine me as if I were an animal being prepared for breeding. Those cold hands touching my neck, my wrists, checking my eyes and teeth. It was too humiliating. "She is in her prime," he told my father once, as if talking about a ripe fruit. "Soon she will be able to bear fruit." I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I felt a frozen dread every time he said something like that. My father only felt satisfied, as if I were a successful harvest from his planting. It was around that time that I began to have bleeding every month. My mother explained to me with tears in her eyes what that meant. "Now you are a young lady, daughter. You have to be even more careful." And she taught me to use the rags she sewed herself for those days. But there was something else in her look, a deep fear that I didn't totally comprehend. When I turned 16, my father announced a special party. "The club is going to celebrate your entry into adult life, Willa," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That was the first time I saw my mother face my father directly. "No, Frank," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "Willa, no. Please." The answer was a slap so strong she fell to the kitchen floor. Aunt Betty ran to help her while I stood paralyzed, not knowing what to do. "You have no voice here," he roared. "You never had it, and you never will." That night, my mother came to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and took my hands in hers. They were freezing. "Willa, my daughter, I need you to know something," she whispered, constantly looking toward the door for fear of being heard. "What they do, what they are going to do, is not right. It's not normal. It's not something a father should allow with his daughter." She swallowed hard, and I saw she was crying silently. "I tried to protect you. I swear I tried, but he is too strong. He has friends who are too powerful. The sheriff, the mayor, they are all part of that cursed club." I remained silent, feeling the weight of those words. After so long, it was the first time someone verbalized the horror we lived. "If you ever have a chance to run away, daughter," she continued, "run, don't look back, don't think about me. Just go. And leave you and my brothers? Never, Mama." She squeezed my hands tightly. "Promise, Willa. Promise you will run if you have the chance." That promise, whispered in the dead of night, was the first real step toward Willa's freedom. Little did she know, her younger brother, Ethan, was already working on a plan that would change everything, starting with an expensive-looking book. "You won't believe what happens next." I promised, more to calm her than because I believed I would ever have that chance. How to escape that prison without bars, but as efficient as any cell. On the day of my 16th birthday, the club meeting was different. More men came, not just the usual 15. There were 20, maybe more. The dining table was covered with a white lace tablecloth, and the best china was used. Bottles and more bottles of expensive liquor were opened. My father forced me to wear a white dress as if I were a bride. Aunt Betty got me ready, crying softly while she braided my hair with ribbons, also white. Ethan, now 14 years old, watched me from his corner, eyes full of a mute horror. "Today is a special day," my father announced to the guests. "My daughter Willa becomes a woman, and as is tradition, she will be officially received into the brotherhood." There was applause, laughter, glasses raised in a macabre toast. "Doctor," Walter approached with his little notebook and his expensive pen. "Everything is recorded in the book," he said. "Today's date will remain marked in the history of our society." I was trembling like a leaf in the wind. I felt my body frozen with fear while hearing the men discussing who would be chosen for the honor of that night, as if they were deciding who would cut the first piece of a birthday cake. It was then that I noticed Ethan moving discreetly through the room. He seemed to be serving drinks, but his eyes were attentive, observing everything. At one moment, our gazes met, and he made a slight movement with his head toward the back door. I didn't immediately understand what he meant, but then he accidentally knocked over a tray with glasses, creating a momentary distraction. Everyone looked at the noise, and my father got up furious to punish the boy. It was in that instant that I felt someone pull my arm. It was Aunt Betty. "Go," she whispered. Everything happened very fast. While my father yelled at Ethan and the guests laughed at the situation, Aunt Betty led me quickly out of the room through the kitchen and pushed me out the back door. "Run to the barn," she urged, her voice frantic. "Ethan prepared everything. Go." And I ran. I ran like I had never run before, the white dress billowing in the dark night like a ghost. I ran without looking back, my heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to explode. But I didn't get far. I didn't have a chance. Before even reaching the barn, I felt strong hands grabbing me by the hair, throwing me to the ground. "Thought you could run away?" It was my father's voice, altered by alcohol and rage. I was dragged back to the house, to the living room where everyone waited. My mother was in the corner with her hands tied behind her back and a rag covering her mouth. Ethan was lying on the floor with his face bloody. Aunt Betty was not in sight. "Seems we have a little discipline problem," my father said to the guests. "But nothing we can't solve." What happened next was so terrible that my mind refuses to remember the details. I only know that at the end of that night, something inside me died forever. The girl who dreamed of freedom, who still had a thread of hope, existed no more. In her place remained only an empty body, a shell. Forgive me, my darlings. I need to pause for just a moment. The wind here in New York suddenly feels a bit too cold tonight. If there is anyone listening who has ever felt their spirit have to leave their body just to endure the pain, I want to wrap my arms around you right now. We may have been shattered, it's true, but look at us, we are still here. In the weeks that followed, I fell ill. A strong fever consumed me, and I was delirious, calling for my mother, for Ethan, for God. Dr. Walter came every day to examine me, more interested in ensuring I would survive than worried about my well-being. "She is strong," I heard him tell my father. "She will recover, and when that happens, she will be ready to fulfill her role." I didn't understand what he meant by my role. I would only discover it a few weeks later, when the fever passed and I was lucid again. It was when my father entered my room, sat next to my bed, and told me with terrifying tranquility, "Willa, you are going to marry the son of Colonel Henry. Everything is already arranged." Marry. That word resonated in my head like a broken bell. I was barely 16 years old, and I was already being traded like merchandise. The groom, Travis Montgomery, was almost 30 years old and was known in the region for his violent temper. The only son of the colonel, he was treated like a prince who could do whatever he pleased. "It will be an honor for our family," my father said, as if he were offering me heaven. "The Montgomerys are the most important family in the region. They have land all the way to the other side of the mountain." I didn't answer. After that night of my birthday, something in me had definitely broken. It was as if I watched everything from afar, as if that Willa who suffered, who bled, who was afraid, was another person. Aunt Betty had disappeared. When I asked for her, my mother just shook her head with moist eyes. "She left," she said softly. But I knew it wasn't true. No one simply left my father's ranch, not alive, at least. Ethan recovered from the beating he received, but something in him had also changed. His eyes, previously just scared, now held a different shine, something between rage and determination. Though he was only 14, he seemed to have aged decades in that night. A week after the announcement of the engagement, I began to feel nausea in the morning. At first I thought it was nerves or a sequel of the fever I had. But when the nausea continued, day after day, my mother looked at me with a dread I had never seen before. "Willa," she whispered, trembling, "when was your last cycle?" I stayed silent, trying to remember. With so many things happening, I hadn't even paid attention that my monthly bleeding hadn't come. In fact, I was already almost 2 months late. Dr. Walter was called to examine me, placed his hands on my belly, asked several questions about my symptoms, and then announced with a satisfied smile, "She is pregnant." The pregnancy was meant to seal the deal, another cruel twist in Willa's story. But the monsters didn't account for the quiet rage this news would spark in both Willa and her brother. The impending wedding is about to be shattered by a brilliant, desperate plan. Continue with us to hear how she escapes her fate. My father showed no surprise. In fact, he seemed happy, proud. It was difficult to decipher that expression, but it certainly wasn't the reaction one would expect from a normal father. "Perfect," he said. "The Colonel will be satisfied. A grandson on the way will seal our agreement definitely." When everyone left the room, my mother came closer and held my hand. "Daughter," she whispered, Do you know who the father is?" "How could I know, after that horrible night of my birthday, when so many men—" I shook my head negatively, feeling the tears run down my face. The wedding was accelerated. It would happen in 2 weeks, not in the town church, but in the private chapel of the Montgomery estate. Everything very discreet, very fast. I was practically being sold to another family, along with the baby growing inside me. The news of the pregnancy didn't please Colonel Henry initially. "A bride already knocked up? By whom?" I heard him yell in my father's study. But soon the discussion calmed down, and the two came out smiling, as if they had reached some agreement. Travis, my fiancé, came to visit me only once before the wedding, a tall man, with a dark beard and small eyes that never seemed to blink. He entered my room as if he were already its owner. He examined me from top to bottom like someone evaluating a mare and said, "She'll do." Those 2 words, spoken with such coldness, told me everything I needed to know about my future husband. The preparations for the wedding continued at full speed. My mother was sewing a white dress for me with lace that hid the small bump of my belly. Her hands trembled while she sewed, and sometimes I found her crying silently over the fabric. On the eve of the wedding, while my mother was making the last adjustments to the dress, Ethan appeared at my bedroom door. He was thinner, and his eyes seemed even older than before. "Can I come in?" he asked in a low voice. My mother nodded, leaving the needle stuck in the fabric. "I'm going to get more ribbons," she said, leaving the room and leaving us alone. Ethan approached slowly. There was something different about him, something I couldn't define. Determination, maybe contained rage. "Willa," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm not going to let this happen." I looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" "The wedding. You can't go. You can't get out of here and go to the Montgomery estate. It would be like leaving one hell to enter another." I sighed. "And what option do I have, Ethan? I'm pregnant. By whom? I don't even know. Maybe by Papa himself. How can I run away?" He took my hands in his. His palms were calloused despite his young age, hands of someone who worked hard in the fields. "I discovered something," he whispered, looking toward the door to ensure we were alone. "The book." "What book?" "The Book of the Brotherhood, the one they keep in the study." I got it. At that moment we heard footsteps in the hallway. Ethan moved away quickly and pretended to be fixing a lock of my hair when my mother returned. During the night I couldn't sleep. Ethan's words resonated in my head. What had he discovered, and how could that help me? The next day, I was taken to the chapel of the Montgomery estate. It was an old stone building with a carved wooden altar. The few invited people were already there. My family, the groom's family, and some friends from the Brotherhood. My father walked me down the central aisle. Travis waited for me at the altar with a cold smile. He wore a dark suit and had his hair slicked back with oil. He looked older than I imagined, maybe almost 40, not 30. The ceremony began. The preacher, an elderly man who seemed uncomfortable, said the ritual words without looking directly at me or Travis. I wondered if he knew what was really happening there, if he understood that that wasn't a marriage for love, but an agreement between powerful men. When it came time for the vows, my legs were shaking so much I thought I would fall. It was then that I noticed a movement at the back of the chapel. Ethan entered silently, carrying something under his arm, wrapped in a cloth. He positioned himself near the door and stood watching. Our eyes met for a moment, and he made a small gesture with his head, as if telling me to continue, to hold on a little longer. I said, "I do," when they asked me, still feeling like I was signing my death sentence. Travis placed a cold ring on my finger, and the preacher declared us husband and wife. At the exit of the church, I was received with cold hugs and empty congratulations. Colonel Henry, Travis's father, looked at me with a mix of disdain, like someone examining a newly acquired object. The reception took place in the main house of the estate. A long table had been prepared in the hall with porcelain plates and silver cutlery. Everything very luxurious, very cold. I sat next to Travis, who barely spoke to me. He talked animatedly with the other men, discussing politics and business. I was just an ornament, a trophy to exhibit. During dinner, I noticed Ethan circulating discreetly among the guests, as if he were serving drinks. No one paid him much attention. After all, he was just a boy, the bride's brother, insignificant in the eyes of those powerful men. At a certain moment, I saw him approach Dr. Walter, who was sitting at the other end of the table. They exchanged a few words, and then Ethan left quickly. The doctor seemed agitated, restless. Shortly after, my father stood up to make a toast. He raised his glass, smiling with that same cold smile I knew so well. "To the union of our families," he said, "and to the fruit of this union that already grows in Willa's belly." There was laughter and more toasts. My stomach churned, and I had to control myself not to vomit right there. It was then that I realized Dr. Walter was no longer at the table. He had left discreetly, and Ethan wasn't in sight either. When dinner ended, I was taken to the room I would share with Travis. It was a large room with a canopy bed and antique furniture. I sat on the edge of the bed trembling, waiting for what would come next. The door opened, and Travis entered. He had a glass of drink in his hand and a smile that froze my blood. "Finally alone, wife," he said, closing the door behind him. I closed my eyes, preparing myself for another night of horror, but then something unexpected happened. There was a noise of glass breaking on the floor below, followed by shouts. Travis stopped halfway, frowning. "What the hell?" More shouts, now louder. Someone was calling for help. Travis cursed under his breath and left the room to see what was happening. I stayed there paralyzed, not knowing what to do. Minutes later, the door opened again, but it wasn't Travis entering. It was Ethan. "Let's go, Willa," he said urgently. "It's now or never." "What is happening?" I asked, getting up with difficulty. "Wyatt set fire to the barn," he explained quickly. "Everyone is out there trying to put it out. It's our chance." Talk about a dramatic exit. That burning barn wasn't just fire. It was Willa's first breath of freedom. But escaping the estate is only the first step. The pursuit begins now, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Don't stop listening. Their life depends on what happens at the train station. Wyatt was one of the youngest hands on the ranch, a boy who was about Ethan's age. I didn't understand how he was involved in this, but there was no time for questions. Ethan helped me change the wedding dress for simpler clothes he had brought. Then he guided me through the dark corridors of the house to a side door. "Wait," I said suddenly. "And Mama and Caleb and Grace?" Ethan shook his head. "We can't take them now. It would be impossible to run with everyone, but we will come back for them, I promise." We went out into the cold night. In the distance, we could see the orange glow of the fire consuming the barn and hear the shouts of the men trying to control it. Ethan led me in the opposite direction, through a small woods, until we reached a dirt road. There, to my surprise, was a wagon waiting with a man at the reins I didn't recognize. "This is Jesse," explained Ethan quickly. "He will take us to the train station in Bowling Green." Jesse nodded silently. He seemed nervous, looking constantly back toward the estate. "And where are we going after?" I asked while Ethan helped me up into the wagon. He pulled something from inside his shirt. A book with a worn black cover, the Book of the Brotherhood. "To New York City," he said. "We are going to take this to the most important newspaper in the country. We are going to expose them all." It was at that moment I began to understand Ethan's plan. The book contained the records of all the meetings, all the names, all the dates. It was the proof we needed to destroy that circle of powerful men who had ruined our lives. While the wagon moved away down the dark road, I looked back one last time. The fire from the barn was now spreading to other buildings of the estate, illuminating the night sky like a giant torch. "I don't know if this will work," I whispered. Ethan held my hand. "It's going to work," he guaranteed. "And if it doesn't work through the newspaper, we have Dr. Walter." "Dr. Walter? He is one of them." "He was useful to them," Ethan corrected, his voice low. "But he was obsessive, Willa. He kept a private logbook, separate from the Brotherhood's ceremonial one. He tracked dates, biological cycles, versus the nights of the meetings. He recorded blood types and physical traits of every child born on the ranch." "I don't understand," I said, confused. "He knew," Ethan said grimly. "He mapped out the timing, He knew exactly which man was with which woman on the nights of conception. He has a record proving who the father is, purely by the dates and the biology. Back then, we didn't have the fancy machines you have today, my angels. But his sick obsession was more precise than any computer. He treated us like lab rats, tracking every day, every hour. Evil, you see, is sometimes terrifyingly meticulous. It's undeniable proof, I repeated, shocked. How do you know they are twins? Ethan smiled for the first time in a long while. Dr. Walter discovered it in the last exam. 2 hearts beating, 2 babies, and he knows who the father is. It's all documented. The wagon continued along the dark road, taking us far from that hell. In front of me, an uncertain future. Inside me, 2 lives growing. And in Ethan's hands, the book that could destroy everything my father had built. For the first time in many years, I felt something I had forgotten. Hope. The trip to Bowling Green was the longest of my life. At every curve of the road, at every noise of the night, my heart raced, fearing we would be discovered. Jesse drove the wagon in silence, eyes fixed on the road in front of us. Occasionally he exchanged meaningful glances with Ethan, as if they shared a secret I didn't know. How do you know each other? I asked finally after almost an hour of silence. Jesse is Wyatt's cousin, explained Ethan. They are from the shantytown folks across the creek. Wyatt's father was one of those who suffered at the hands of our father. What do you mean? Ethan took a deep breath before continuing. The Brotherhood didn't just hurt us, Willa. They tormented the whole region. The men from the shantytown were especially persecuted. Some disappeared, others came back different, broken. Those words hit me like a punch. I knew my father was a monster, but the extent of his evil seemed to have no limits. Dawn was almost arriving when we spotted the lights of the train station. It was a simple wooden building with a small office for buying tickets and a cargo warehouse. Jesse stopped the wagon at a safe distance. I can't get any closer, he explained. They might recognize me. Ethan and I got down. The boy hugged Jesse briefly, exchanging a few words in a low voice before the man left, taking the wagon back the way we had come. And now? I asked, feeling fatigue and fear mix inside me. Now we wait, answered Ethan. The first train to New York leaves at 6 inches the morning. We looked for a place to take refuge behind the cargo warehouse. Ethan took some bread and cheese from a bundle he was carrying, and we ate in silence, also sharing a canteen of water. How did you manage to plan all this? I asked, amazed at the capacity of my brother, who was only 14. He shrugged as if it were no big deal. After that night, your birthday, I knew I had to do something. I started observing more, listening more. I made friends with Wyatt when he came to work on the ranch. He told me about the shanty town, about how his father had been mistreated by the men of the Brotherhood. And the book, how did you get it? It was hard, admitted Ethan, eyes shining with contained pride. I watched Papa. I knew he kept the key to the secret drawer on a cord around his neck. One night, when he was drunk after a meeting, I managed to take the key while he slept. I made a copy with wax and returned the original. Then, it was just a matter of waiting for the right moment. I looked at my brother with new eyes. That skinny boy who cried silently in the corner of the living room during the Brotherhood meetings had transformed into a brave and determined strategist. I know. It might sound hard to believe that a 4-year-old boy could manage all that, right, my dears? But let me tell you, pain has a way of aging a soul faster than time ever could. Ethan was never really allowed to be a child. He had to become a soldier in his own home just to survive. Have any of you out there had to grow up too soon because life gave you no choice? Please, share it with me in the comments. And Dr. Walter, I asked, how did you convince him to help us? Ethan got serious. He is not a good man, Willa. Don't think that. He collaborated with the Brotherhood for years, but there is one thing he loves more than anything else. His scientific work. Those tests he does, that business. It's something new, revolutionary, according to him. When he realized he could lose everything if the Brotherhood were exposed, he got scared. I made a deal with him. If he helped us, his name would be left out of the denunciations. Do you think he will keep his part? I don't know, confessed Ethan. But the documents he handed me are sufficient, even without his testimony. The hours passed slowly. I dozed a little, leaning on Ethan, who remained alert. When the sky began to lighten, he shook me gently. "Time to go," he said. "We need to buy the tickets before the train arrives." I fixed my hair and cleaned my face with a little water from the canteen. We were about to leave our hiding place when we heard the sound of horses approaching. Ethan pushed me back behind the warehouse. "Stay down," he whispered. Through a crack between the wooden boards, we saw 3 riders arriving at the station. Even at a distance, I immediately recognized one of them, my father. By his side, Travis Montgomery and a man I didn't know, probably some foreman from the estate. "How did they find us so fast?" I murmured, feeling panic grow. Ethan didn't answer, but his face was tense. The 3 men dismounted and entered the station office. Through the window, we could see them talking to the clerk, who seemed nervous. "They know we'll try to take the train," concluded Ethan. "We need to change the plan." I looked around desperate. There was nowhere to go. We were cornered. It was then that we heard the train whistle approaching. The men came out of the office and positioned themselves on the platform, looking in all directions. "We'll have to run," decided Ethan. "When the train is stopping, we will run along the opposite side of the platform and try to get on the last car." "We'll never make it," I protested. "We have to try. It's our only chance." The train was arriving, slowing down with a screech of brakes. People began to gather on the platform, workers, merchants, some families. My father and his companions watched every face attentively. Ethan took my hand. "Now," he whispered, and we started running, crouched down, rounding the warehouse on the opposite side. We ran as fast as we could. Ethan in front, me behind, stumbling occasionally due to my condition. The last car was almost in front of us when I heard a shout. "There they are!" I looked back and saw my father pointing in our direction, already mounting his horse. Travis and the other man did the same. "Run, Willa!" shouted Ethan. "Don't stop!" The train was almost completely stopped. Now Ethan reached the last car and climbed up with agility. He turned around and extended his hand to me. "Jump!" I gathered all my strength and jumped, grabbing Ethan's hand. He pulled me up at the exact moment the riders approached. My father was so close I could see the fury in his eyes. He reached out his arm trying to grab me, but his fingers barely brushed my dress. The train began to move again, gaining speed, leaving my father and the other men behind. That near miss symbolizes the chain being broken. Willa, pregnant and running, has finally left Harlan behind. But the journey is long, and the true horror, the identity of the children's father, still lurks in Ethan's pocket. We need to know what's in that sealed envelope. Stay tuned. They still tried to keep up with us for a while, but soon the horses could no longer maintain the pace. I fell to the floor of the car, panting, heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of my mouth. Ethan knelt beside me, equally breathless, but with a gleam of victory in his eyes. "We did it," he said between heavy breaths. We were in the cargo car among boxes of merchandise and some animals. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe, at least for now. "We don't have tickets," I remembered, worried. "What will we do when the conductor comes?" "I have money," answered Ethan, taking some crumpled bills from his pocket. He saw my questioning look and added, "I've been saving it for 2 years. Every penny I found, every odd job I did for the hands without Papa knowing. I knew this day would come, Willa. I just didn't know it would be today. It's not much, but it should be enough to buy the tickets now." He helped me sit on a stack of sacks, probably grain, and went to find the conductor. I stayed alone, hugging my still almost imperceptible belly, thinking about the 2 little beings growing inside me. Twins. I still hadn't fully processed that reality. 2 children would be born from all that violence. 2 innocent lives, fruit of something so terrible. How could I love them knowing where they came from? How would I raise them alone? A 6-year-old girl with no skills, no formal education, no money. Tears began to run down my face. They weren't tears of sadness nor of joy. They were tears of something deeper, more primitive, a cry of liberation. Ethan returned a few minutes later. "It's all settled," he said, sitting next to me. I explained to the conductor that we had to leave in a hurry, and he accepted our money. "We are officially passengers now." "Where are we going exactly in New York City?" I asked, drying my tears. "To the newspaper, the Daily Chronicle," answered Ethan. "It's the most important newspaper in the country. If anyone can publish this story, it's them. And if they don't believe us, we are just a pregnant girl and a 4-year-old boy. Ethan patted the pocket where he kept the book. We have proof. Names, dates, everything. And we have Dr. Walter's documents. He also took another folded paper from the inside pocket of his jacket. It was a sealed envelope. What is that? The documents Dr. Walter created, Ethan said quietly, passing me the folded paper. Dr. Walter gave them to me right before we left. I took the envelope with trembling hands. I wanted to open it, and at the same time I was afraid of what I would find there. Who was the father of my children? My own father? The sheriff? The mayor? Some other monster from that brotherhood? I clutched the envelope, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. That answer could wait. The trip to New York would take almost a whole day. In the first miles we were tense, expecting the train to stop at any moment and for us to be captured. But the hours passed and nothing happened. The conductor, an elderly man with a gray mustache, returned a few times to check if we were okay. He brought us water and even shared his lunch with us, a piece of cheese and hard bread, but which seemed like the most delicious banquet at that moment. "Where are you two going, so young and alone?" he asked, curious but kind. "To our aunt's house," answered Ethan promptly. "Our mother died and our father. Our father is not a good man." The conductor nodded, seeming to understand more than the words revealed. "There are many not good men in this world," he commented, looking at me with a sort of compassion in his gaze. The afternoon advanced, and with it an enormous tiredness took over my body. I fell asleep leaning on Ethan, rocked by the rhythmic movement of the train. When I woke up, it was already getting dark. Ethan had also dozed off, and was now sleeping with his head resting on a box. He looked so small, so fragile. It was hard to believe that that boy had faced so much and planned such an audacious escape. For a moment I let myself sink into dark thoughts. What if everything went wrong? What if the newspaper didn't believe us? What if my father found us in New York? What if Dr. Walter's documents weren't enough to prove the crimes of the Brotherhood? It was then that I felt for the first time a slight movement inside my belly. It wasn't a kick or anything like that. It was too soon for that. It was more like a flutter, a subtle reminder that I wasn't alone, that 2 little lives depended on me. That little movement changed something inside me. Suddenly, it wasn't just about escaping, about vengeance, about exposing the Brotherhood's crimes anymore. It was about surviving, about creating a future for those 2 children, about building something new from the ruins of my past. "We will make it," I murmured to my belly. "I promise." I don't know how long I was there absorbed in my thoughts, but at some point I noticed Ethan had woken up and was watching me. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "I think I felt the babies," I answered with a voice broken by emotion. It was strange, but good. Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his young face. "They will be fine, Willa. We will all be fine." In that moment, something crystallized inside me, a resolution, a determination I had never felt before. It didn't matter what happened in New York. It didn't matter if the newspaper believed us or not. I would fight. I would fight for my children, for my brother, for myself. I took the envelope from Dr. Walter again, and with a decided movement broke the seal. "Are you sure?" asked Ethan, surprised. "Yes," I answered. "I need to know. I need to face this truth, whatever it is." Inside the envelope was a page torn from Dr. Walter's private journal. It wasn't a lab result, but a handwritten chart. It listed the date of my 16th birthday, my biological cycle, and the specific window of conception. Next to the date, highlighted in red ink, was the name of the man assigned to me that night. I felt the air leave my lungs. The name wasn't a stranger's. It was Frank Jenkins, my father. I looked at Ethan, horrified. He opened the stolen Brotherhood book to the corresponding date. There, in my father's own handwriting, was the sick confirmation, rights of primacy, exercised by F. Jenkins, Dr. Walter's note clarified the macabre truth. Frank Jenkins, father of the patient, is the biological father. There were no doubts about who the father of my children was. "My father," I whispered the words burning my throat. "The father of my children is my own father." Ethan dropped the paper and hugged me tight. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. I can feel you shivering, my dears, because I am shaking just remembering that moment. The disgust. It made me want to claw my own skin off. But do you know what? That very revulsion turned my fear into a blazing fire. I was no longer a victim. I had become a mother, ready to fight until my very last breath. He just held me while I cried, a silent cry that seemed to come from the depths of my soul. When I finally calmed down, I felt something different inside me. It wasn't just pain or repulsion. It was pure rage, incandescent, a fury that gave me strength instead of paralyzing me. Now we have one more reason to keep going, I said, wiping my tears. He has to pay for what he did. They all have to pay. The train continued advancing through the night, taking us toward an uncertain future. But for the first time, it wasn't fear guiding my thoughts. It was the determination of a survivor, of a mother who would protect her children at any cost, of a woman who had finally found her voice. New York City awaited us, and with it the chance for justice. New York was a world completely different from everything I knew. The wide and busy streets, the tall buildings, the hurried people. Everything seemed strange and intimidating to me. I, who had never gone beyond the town neighboring the ranch, felt lost in that sea of people and noise. We arrived at the station already at the end of the afternoon. Ethan held the Book of the Brotherhood firmly under his arm, as if it were our most precious possession, and in a way it was. The Daily Chronicle is a few blocks from here, explained Ethan, consulting a small map he had gotten from the train conductor. We need to go now, before they close. We walked hurriedly through the streets of downtown, me trying to hide my discomfort and fatigue. The trip had been long, and my body, still adapting to the pregnancy, protested with every step. The newspaper building was an imposing 3-story construction with a stone facade and large windows. At the entrance, a bronze plaque announced the Daily Chronicle, the most important newspaper in the region since 1870. We entered timidly into the lobby, where a receptionist looked at us with curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked, clearly surprised to see 2 children, for that was how we looked, entering alone into a newspaper of that importance. "We need to speak with a reporter," answered Ethan, trying to sound older than he was. "We have an important story to tell." The receptionist smiled with condescension. "Everybody has an important story to tell, young man. The reporters are busy. Maybe you can come back another day." I felt desperation grow inside me. We couldn't wait. My father and the other members of the Brotherhood were probably already looking for us. Every hour, every minute counted. It was then that a woman came down the stairs of the building. She was tall, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing dark-rimmed glasses. She carried a leather portfolio and seemed in a hurry. "Margaret," called the receptionist. "These young people want to talk to a reporter. They say they have an important story." The woman stopped and looked at us over her glasses. There was something in her look, a curiosity, a perspicacity that gave me a pinch of hope. "What kind of story?" she asked me directly. I hesitated, looking at Ethan. He nodded slightly, encouraging me to speak. "A story about abuse," I answered, finding courage I don't know where. "About a brotherhood of powerful men who do terrible things. And we have proof." Something in the woman's face changed. She approached us, lowering her voice. "Where do you come from?" "Harlan?" answered Ethan. She studied us for a long moment, her sharp eyes seeming to see through us. I truly believe the good Lord placed Margaret there at that exact moment. She didn't just see 2 dirty, runaway children. She saw the ghosts haunting our eyes. Sometimes, the truth is so heavy that even a stranger can feel the weight of the burden you're carrying just by looking at you. "Come with me," she said, finally gesturing toward the stairs. "I am Margaret, editor-in-chief of this paper, and I think I need to hear this story." Willa found an unexpected ally in Margaret, a powerful woman who recognized the weight of their story. This wasn't pity. It was the start of a journalistic war. But exposing the Brotherhood will take time, and Willa must learn to wait. "Don't go anywhere. The delivery of justice is coming." Margaret's office was a small, organized chaos. Papers everywhere, newspaper clippings, stacked books, a typewriter on the desk, and the unmistakable smell of strong coffee and cigarettes. "Sit down." She indicated 2 chairs in front of her desk. "And now tell me everything from the beginning." For almost 2 hours we talked. First me, then Ethan. We told her about the ranch, about the brotherhood, about the monthly meetings, about the book Ethan had stolen, about Dr. Walter's documents, about the proof, about my pregnancy, about the forced marriage, about our desperate escape. During the whole time, Margaret listened to us with absolute attention, taking quick notes on a pad, occasionally asking us to clarify some point. Her face maintained a professional expression, but her eyes couldn't hide the horror upon hearing our story. When we finished, she stayed silent for a few moments, her fingers drumming on the table. "Do you have any notion of what you are denouncing?" she asked finally. "We are talking about extremely powerful men, the mayor, the sheriff, people with influence, not just in Harlan, but in the whole state." "We know," answered Ethan firmly. "That's why we came to the most important paper. We need the story to be too big to be silenced." Margaret smiled slightly, a sad smile. "You are brave, that is undeniable." She took the book of the Brotherhood that Ethan had placed on the table and began to browse it, her eyebrows raised with every page she turned. "Here there are dates, names, even amounts. It's all very detailed," she murmured, more to herself than to us. Next, she examined Dr. Walter's medical documents, the ones I had opened on the train. Her expression became even more serious as she read the meticulous notes and the final, horrific conclusion. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, as if she needed to compose herself. Margaret nodded thoughtfully, then suddenly stood up. "I'm going to call more people for this meeting. We need more eyes on this." She left the room and returned minutes later, accompanied by two men. One of them, older, with gray hair and thick-rimmed glasses, was introduced as Arthur, the paper's political editor. The other, younger, with an air of permanent restlessness, was Jason, an investigative reporter. Again, we had to tell our story. The two men listened with expressions varying between disbelief and indignation. When we finished, Arthur was the first to speak. "It's the most disturbing story I've heard in 30 years of journalism," he said, taking off his glasses and cleaning them nervously. "But it is also a bombshell. If we publish this, there will be a political earthquake in the state, and it is exactly for that reason that we must publish it." "This is real journalism, Arthur," intervened Jason enthusiastically. "This is why we exist." "I'm not saying we shouldn't publish," clarified Arthur. "I'm saying we need to be very careful. These men have power, money, and influence. They are going to try to destroy us." Margaret, who had been silent, leaned her hands on the table. "We need more. The book and the medical documents are a start, but we need independent confirmation. Other victims, witnesses, anything that corroborates this story." It was then that Ethan mentioned the shantytown community across the creek, where Jesse and Wyatt came from. "They also suffered at the hands of the Brotherhood," he explained. "Wyatt's father was one of the victims." "That is good," said Jason, writing quickly. "I will go there tomorrow myself." "And as for you two," asked Margaret, "where are you going to stay? It's not safe for you to wander around." We hadn't thought of that. In fact, we hadn't planned anything beyond reaching the newspaper. Our money was running out, and we knew no one in New York. "I have an idea," said Arthur after a moment of reflection. "My sister Ruth runs a shelter for women, victims of violence on the other side of the city. It is a discreet, safe place. Willa can stay there." "And Ethan?" I asked, worried. "He can stay with me," offered Jason. "I have a spare room in my apartment." Margaret stood up. "Decision made. It is settled. You will be safe while we work on this story. But I want to be clear. It will take time. We need to investigate everything thoroughly, confirm every detail before publishing anything." "How much time?" I asked, anxious. "A few weeks at minimum," she answered honestly. "Maybe more. Investigative journalism doesn't happen overnight, especially when we are dealing with something of this magnitude." We left the newspaper already at the start of the night. Jason accompanied us first to the shelter where I would stay, then taking Ethan to his apartment. The farewell was difficult. It was the first time since our escape that we would be separated. "I will come see you every day," promised Ethan, hugging me tight. "Don't worry. Take care," I answered, fighting back tears. "And thank you, Ethan, for everything." Those next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I stayed hidden in that room at the shelter, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, terrified that at any moment the door would burst open and my father would be standing there. But instead of my father, it was the truth that came knocking. On a Sunday morning, Jason arrived at the shelter waving a copy of the Daily Chronicle. His hands were shaking. The headline took up half the front page. The House of Horrors, Inside the Kentucky Brotherhood. It was all there. The names, the dates, the stolen funds, and the horrific abuse of power. Margaret had done it. She hadn't just published our story. She had verified it with 3 other women from the shantytown, and even found a former maid who had worked at our ranch. The story didn't just make waves, it caused a tsunami. The governor of Kentucky was forced to intervene that very afternoon. Ethan came to see me 2 days later. He looked different, lighter, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his small shoulders. "They got him, Willa," he cried, burying his face in my lap. "The state police raided the ranch. Papa, the sheriff, Colonel Henry, they are all in custody. Justice served." The power of the truth, backed by Ethan's courage and Margaret's integrity, brought down the entire house of cards. But Willa's journey isn't over. She carries the physical reminder of her past, and she must face her deepest fear when her sons are born. Listen on, this is the most powerful part of her story. I wish I could tell you that I felt happy, but what I felt was a strange emptiness, followed by a wave of nausea. The monster was in a cage, yes, but I was still carrying the consequences of his evil inside me. My mother was found in the basement of the house, malnourished but alive. Aunt Betty, we learned later, had not left. She had been taken by the Brotherhood years ago to a sanatorium in Ohio to keep her quiet. We managed to get her out, and she spent her remaining years with my mother, finally safe. But my personal battle was far from over. 5 months later, on a snowy night in that charity hospital in Brooklyn, I went into labor. I was terrified. For months, I had been tormented by a single thought. What if they look like him? What if I look into their eyes and see the monster who destroyed me? The pain was unbearable, tearing me apart just as my past had. I screamed for my mother, who wasn't there, and for God, who I thought had abandoned me. But when the cries of the first baby filled the room, followed minutes later by the second, silence fell over my soul. The nurse cleaned them up and placed 2 bundles in my arms. 2 boys. I hesitated to look. My heart hammered against my ribs. Slowly, I pulled back the blanket. They didn't look like Frank Jenkins. They didn't look like the pain or the shame. They looked like me. They had Ethan's chin and my mother's dark hair. They were innocent. That was the moment, my darlings, that the real Willa was born. Not the victim, not the runaway, but the survivor. I looked at those 2 tiny faces, and I made a vow. I whispered to them, "Your grandfather tried to use you to extend his power, to seal a legacy of evil, but he failed. You are mine, and you will grow up to be everything he was not. You will be kind, you will be gentle, and you will respect women." Raising them wasn't easy. I scrubbed floors, I sewed, I went hungry so they wouldn't have to. Looking at the scars on these old hands, I feel proud. If you are walking through your darkest days, remember this. Darkness is not hereditary, only love is passed down. If this old granny's story touched your heart, please leave a heart emoji in the comments so I know I am not alone. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, the trauma of Harlan haunting my dreams. But every morning, when I saw their smiles, the shadows retreated a little further. Ethan stayed in New York, becoming a lawyer, a fierce one, who spent his life fighting for children who had no voice, just like he once did for me. My darlings, looking at the life I've knitted from the wreckage, I know now that evil is not hereditary. It is a choice, just as love is. My father's blood ran through my sons, but his darkness never touched their souls because I chose to flood them with light. To anyone listening who feels defined by their scars, your past is merely a lesson, not a life sentence. You hold the needle, and only you decide the pattern of your future. Do not let fear win. You have the strength to break the chain. You are the author of your own redemption. If this story gave you hope, please subscribe to Grandma's Memories. Let's keep weaving these truths together.